The historical pattern of currency collapse leading to the downfall of major empires with a focus on Rome, Spain, Britain, and the United States. There's a secret pattern that has quietly destroyed every major empire in history, and almost nobody talks about it. It's not the dramatic invasions you see in movies, or the sudden revolutions that fill history books. The real killer is much more subtle and far more dangerous. It's currency collapse. From the mighty Romans to the global reach of the British Empire and even the modern dominance of the United States, the same hidden force has brought down the world's most powerful nations. The story always starts the same way: an empire at its peak, seemingly invincible, with a currency trusted across continents. But beneath the surface, cracks begin to form. Leaders start spending more than they can afford, funding endless wars, massive projects, and promises to their people. At first, it seems harmless. After all, they're the richest, the strongest, the most advanced. But when the bills come due and there isn't enough real wealth to pay for it all, the temptation to cheat the system becomes too strong. They start to debase their currency, quietly reducing its value, hoping no one will notice. But history shows that the consequences are always the same. Prices soar, trust evaporates, and the very foundation of the empire begins to crumble. What's truly shocking is that every empire believed it was different, that the old rules didn't apply to them, but the pattern never lies. Today, as the world watches the US dollar face unprecedented challenges, rising debt, relentless money printing, and growing global competition, the warning signs are flashing brighter than ever. Is America about to repeat the same fatal mistake? The answer lies in the stories of the empires that came before, and the secret pattern that has always determined their fate. If you think this couldn't happen again, think again. The pattern is unfolding right now, and the next chapter could change everything you thought you knew about power, money, and the future of the world. At its height, Rome was the center of the world, a superpower with unmatched armies, sprawling cities, and a currency trusted from Britain to Egypt. The Roman denarius, a silver coin, was the backbone of this vast empire. For centuries, it held its value because every coin contained real silver, and everyone knew exactly what it was worth. This trust in Roman money fueled expansion, paid soldiers, and built the roads and aqueducts that still stand today. But as Rome's ambitions grew, so did its expenses. Every new conquest meant more soldiers to pay, more borders to defend, and more luxuries for the elite. Soon the empire was spending far more than it could afford. Instead of cutting back, Roman leaders took a shortcut that would prove fatal. They started debasing their currency. It began with Emperor Nero, who quietly reduced the silver content in each coin, hoping no one would notice. But the pattern was set. Over the next 2 centuries, the denarius went from nearly pure silver to little more than a worthless metal disc with a thin silver coating. By the time of Emperor Gallienus, the coin was just 5% silver. Imagine being a Roman soldier, risking your life on the frontier, only to be paid in money that was worth a fraction of what it used to be. Prices exploded, and the cost of basic goods soared 50 times higher. Farmers refused to accept coins, demanding barter or gold instead. Soldiers threatened mutiny unless they were paid in real value. The government tried to hide the truth, but the damage was done. The economy seized up, tax collection collapsed, and the empire's legendary legions could no longer be funded. What's most shocking is that Rome's fall wasn't caused by foreign invaders or natural disasters. It was self-inflicted. The empire destroyed its own currency to pay for promises it couldn't keep, and when the money died, so did the empire. Rome's story is a warning. When trust in money is lost, even the greatest power can fall from within. But Rome was just the first. The same pattern would repeat again and again, each time with devastating results. Spain's rise to power was nothing short of legendary. In the 1500s, after conquering the Americas, Spain found itself sitting on a mountain of unimaginable wealth. The discovery of the Cerro Rico mountain in what is now Bolivia unleashed a flood of silver the world had never seen. For over a century, Spanish ships carried tons of silver across the Atlantic, minting coins that became the first true global currency. The Spanish dollar was trusted everywhere, from Europe to Asia, and Spain's empire stretched across continents. It seemed like an era of endless prosperity. But beneath the glittering surface, a hidden danger was growing. The more silver Spain poured into the world, the less each coin was worth. Prices across Europe soared in what became the first global inflation crisis. Suddenly, what cost one coin now cost 10. But the real problem wasn't just inflation, it was that Spain wasn't building anything lasting. Instead of investing in industries or innovation, the empire spent its silver on endless wars, lavish palaces, and luxury goods imported from other countries. The wealth flowed in, but it flowed right back out, leaving Spain with little to show for its riches. As debts mounted, Spanish kings borrowed more and more, fighting wars on multiple fronts and refusing to cut back. When the debts became unpayable, Spain did the unthinkable. It defaulted, not once, but 4 times in just 40 years. Each default shattered trust, sending interest rates soaring and making it even harder to borrow. Desperate, the government began debasing its coins, mixing in cheaper metals and hoping no one would notice. But the world did notice, and confidence in Spanish money evaporated. By the 1600s, Spain's military was underfunded, its colonies restless, and its economy in shambles. The empire that once seemed unstoppable had spent and borrowed itself into decline. Spain's story is a powerful reminder that too much wealth, when mismanaged, can be just as dangerous as too little. The silver that was supposed to make Spain invincible ended up being the curse that brought the empire to its knees. And as history would show, this wasn't the last time a superpower would be undone by its own riches. At its peak, the British Empire was the largest and most powerful the world had ever seen. The sun never set on its territories, and the British pound sterling was the backbone of global trade. For over 2 centuries, the pound was the world's reserve currency, trusted everywhere and backed by gold. This financial dominance allowed Britain to borrow, build, and expand its influence to every corner of the globe. But beneath the surface, the seeds of collapse were quietly being sown. The cost of maintaining such a vast empire was staggering, and Britain relied heavily on borrowing to fund its ambitions. The real breaking point came with the World Wars. By the end of World War I, Britain's national debt had exploded, and the government was forced to abandon the gold standard, turning the pound into a fiat currency backed only by promises. After a brief and disastrous attempt to return to gold, the pound was devalued, and trust in British money began to erode. World War II pushed Britain even further into debt, with the cost of victory leaving the country financially crippled. In 1944, the Bretton Woods Agreement officially replaced the pound with the US dollar as the world's primary reserve currency, a humiliating blow that signaled the end of British financial supremacy. The aftermath was a slow-motion disaster. Britain tried to prop up the pound, but repeated devaluations in 1949 and 1967 destroyed savings and confidence. Inflation soared, and the government was forced to seek a bailout from the IMF, a shocking reversal for a nation that once ruled the world. Meanwhile, the empire unraveled. India gained independence, the Suez Crisis exposed Britain's military weakness, and one colony after another broke away, not because of foreign conquest, but because Britain could no longer afford to hold on. By the 1970s, the country was teetering on the edge of economic collapse, with inflation hitting 25% and the pound becoming a symbol of decline. The lesson is clear. Even the mightiest empire can fall within a single generation when its currency fails. Britain's story is a stark warning that financial mismanagement, debt, and the loss of trust in money can bring down even the most powerful nations. And as history moved forward, the world would soon see this pattern repeat on an even bigger stage. For nearly a century, the US dollar has been the world's ultimate symbol of trust and power. After World War II, the dollar became the backbone of the global economy, replacing the British pound as the world's reserve currency. Backed by gold and supported by America's unmatched economic and military strength, the dollar was as good as gold itself. But as decades passed, the United States began to follow a path eerily similar to the empires that came before. The Vietnam War, massive social programs, and a growing network of military bases around the world pushed government spending to new heights. By the 1970s, foreign nations noticed that America was printing more dollars than it had gold to back them. The pressure mounted until President Nixon made a fateful decision. He closed the gold window, turning the dollar into a pure fiat currency. At first, the world adjusted, and the U.S. created the petrodollar system, ensuring global demand for dollars by pricing oil in U.S. currency. But the spending never stopped. Year after year, the national debt soared, and the Federal Reserve began creating trillions of dollars out of thin air, especially after the 2008 financial crisis and during the COVID-19 pandemic. The result? Inflation surged, and the cost of living for ordinary Americans skyrocketed. Meanwhile, the world began to lose faith in the dollar's dominance. The percentage of global reserves held in dollars has steadily dropped, and powerful nations like China and Russia are building alternatives, buying gold, and trading in their own currencies. The BRICS alliance is openly challenging the dollar's supremacy, and central banks everywhere are diversifying away from U.S. assets. Despite these warning signs, many in power insist that America is different, that the rules of history don't apply. But the pattern is impossible to ignore. The U.S. is running massive deficits, printing money at record speed, and watching its global influence wane. The same mistakes that doomed Rome, Spain, and Britain are now playing out in real time. The question isn't whether the U.S. dollar is vulnerable, it's how long the world will keep believing in it. As the cracks widen and the warning signs flash, the stage is set for a turning point that could reshape the global order. Is America repeating history's biggest mistake? The answer may be unfolding right before our eyes. Imagine waking up one morning to headlines announcing that the U.S. dollar is no longer the world's reserve currency. It sounds unthinkable, but history shows that no currency holds the crown forever. When the dollar falls, the shockwaves won't just hit Wall Street, they'll ripple through every corner of the globe. The first impact will be felt in international trade. For decades, countries have relied on the dollar to buy oil, settle debts, and store their national reserves. If trust in the dollar collapses, nations will scramble to find alternatives, turning to gold, the euro, China's yuan, or even digital currencies. This sudden shift would send markets into chaos, with wild swings in exchange rates and a scramble to reprice trillions of dollars worth of contracts. For Americans, the consequences would be immediate and painful. The cost of imports would skyrocket, making everything from electronics to groceries far more expensive. Inflation would surge as the value of the dollar plummets, eroding savings and crushing the middle class. Interest rates would spike as foreign investors demand higher returns to offset the risk of holding U.S. assets. The government would struggle to finance its massive debt, and social programs could face brutal cuts. But the fallout wouldn't stop at America's borders. Countries that have built their economies around the dollar would face financial turmoil. Global banks, corporations, and even governments could be pushed to the brink as the value of their dollar holdings evaporates. Trade wars, currency crises, and political instability could erupt in regions that once depended on the stability of the U.S. dollar. Some analysts warn that a sudden collapse could trigger a global recession or even a depression, worse than anything seen in living memory. Others believe the world would eventually adapt, creating a new financial order with a different reserve currency or a basket of digital assets. Either way, the transition would be anything but smooth. The fall of the dollar would mark the end of an era and the beginning of a new, uncertain chapter in global history. The only question is whether the world will face a slow, managed decline or a sudden, chaotic reset that changes everything overnight. So, with all the warning signs flashing and history's lessons laid bare, we're left with the question that everyone's afraid to ask. How close are we to the end of America's financial dominance? The truth is, no one can predict the exact moment when confidence in the dollar will finally break. But the evidence is mounting, and the pattern is impossible to ignore. The U.S. national debt has soared past $36 trillion, growing faster than at any point in history. Trillion-dollar deficits have become routine, and the government continues to spend far more than it collects. Meanwhile, the Federal Reserve has printed more money in the last decade than in the previous 100 years combined, fueling inflation that's eroding the value of every dollar in your pocket. Around the world, countries are quietly preparing for a future without the dollar at the center. Central banks are buying gold at record rates, the BRICS nations are building new payment systems, and global reserves held in dollars are steadily shrinking. Even longtime allies are hedging their bets, diversifying into other currencies and digital assets. The world is watching, waiting for the tipping point. Some experts warn that we're already in the late stages of the pattern, with only a few steps left before the final collapse. Others argue that America's unique advantages, its military, its innovation, its deep financial markets, could buy more time, delaying the inevitable. But history is clear. No empire, no matter how powerful, has ever escaped the consequences of overspending and currency debasement. The end rarely comes all at once. It starts with small cracks, rising prices, falling trust, subtle shifts in global trade. Then almost overnight, the dam breaks. The dollar loses its status, and the world scrambles to adapt. The real question isn't just how close we are to the end, but whether we're ready for what comes next. Will the U.S. manage a controlled decline, or will the world be thrown into chaos by a sudden collapse? One thing is certain: the pattern never lies, and the clock is ticking. If you want to understand the future, look to the past, because history's most important lessons are unfolding right now, in real time.